is to look at the role of China in our supply chain, in investment in critical infrastructure in this country. And I can't provide a running commentary on individual cases. You'll know, having been in my position, why that is so important that we don't do that. But as I've made clear already, we are taking into account the national security considerations as well as our need for investment in the supply chain. I would say that in terms of the legacy that we were left by the previous minister, is that he was perfectly happy to leave our energy system exposed with the British people paying the price. And the retreat, the under new management line that he was parroting earlier this week, would leave us even more exposed to those petrostates, to the dictators. We are getting on with our clean power mission to end energy security, and I'll take no lessons from him on energy security, given their record.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear the Minister point out that we are left with the legacy of an absolutely vacant industrial strategy when it comes to green investment over the past 14 years. And I urge her to explain further how we might be able to make sure that we are developing the skills and competencies in this country to make sure that we have good, strong, ethical supply chains.
Thank my honourable friend for that question. One of the things we have launched is the Clean Industry Bonus, which will be absolutely crucial in terms of protecting our supply chain. We're investing through GB Energy and through the National Wealth Fund. As I mentioned, lithium in Cornwall is just one example. And through the Global Clean Power Alliance, which we launched at the end of last year, we'll be bringing together our counterparts from other countries, including an IEA conference in April, to look at a supply chain mission so we can deal with these issues, because they're not just issues that affect us in this country. As other countries seek to decarbonise, seek to increase the role of renewables, there are capacity issues across that supply chain, and that's something that we all need to deal with, cooperating together.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this urgent question, which is so important. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the Minister has rightly said, energy security has been a key term in this chamber. There are two ways of looking at energy security. First of all, which is to generate our own renewable energy to avoid volatility, price volatility, exposure to authoritarian regimes, ensuring we've got the jobs here at home for design and construction. Secondly, it's about our national security issues around our energy infrastructure. That's also a term of energy security. A former MI6 chief has warned of the vulnerabilities, either deliberate or inadvertent, posed by foreign-controlled software embedded in our energy infrastructure. Given these serious concerns, can the Minister guarantee that any further investment in Scotland will ensure that this increases both the energy and national security future?
Thank you. As I've said, there are robust processes, and we are going through these processes to try to make absolutely sure that our national security is not compromised by investment from overseas, and that is something we'll continue to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Grangemouth refinery is a key piece of vital infrastructure for Scotland, and its economic contribution to the Scottish economy every year is over £400 million. The Grangemouth refinery is also a joint venture between PetroChina, owned by the Chinese state, and INEOS, a multinational conglomerate. Together they are PetroINEOS. The refinery is due to close, with thousands of jobs being lost, an unjust transition, and Scotland having to rely on importing oil, all at a time of great global volatility. Why is the government allowing a foreign government and private capital dictate Scotland's industrial capacity, its ability to produce oil, and overall our national security?
Well, we're not allowing anyone to dictate to us, and I know that the honourable member has been deep in conversation with the Minister for Energy for some time over the future of Grangemouth. But as I've reiterated, we absolutely need to attract the investment that we need to meet our clean power mission, to secure our future energy security, and in the long run bring down bills for the British people. We need to balance national security concerns as in tandem with that, and neither one of them takes priority. We need to tackle those challenges together, and that's what we'll do.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Sir.
Mr. Speaker, whatever the question is about energy, China is not the answer.
Yeah.
It's on two fronts. We know that the MOD and the Department of Energy Security has raised objections about the Treasury's push to bring Minyang Smart Energy into the circuit on this one, to bid for this. The second thing is that China is determined to use slave labor in their products. We are, under this government, investing in solar arrays which have a huge amount of slave labor in them producing polysilicon. Does the government not recognize that their tilt towards China to get them to invest in this runs the real risk of utter dependency on China and, of course, serious threats to our security, highlighted endlessly by the security services? Will they now stop?
Recognise that the Right Honourable Member has long-standing concerns about the role of China and its investment in our economy, and he's been a great champion of raising concerns about forced labour. He's right to raise those concerns. We have set up the Solar Task Force, I'm sure he's aware, to look at the issue of whether there's forced labour in our solar supply chains. We also, as I said, with the Global Clean Power Alliance, there will be a supply chain mission as part of that launched. And as I said, it's not something that one country can tackle by itself. We all need to be alert to the risks of slave labour. I know that there was an amendment passed in the House of Lords last night that means the issue's coming back to the Chamber soon. I look forward to the discussion then.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that developing our economic and trading relationships with other nations is one lever of many that this government is using to drive growth and investment alongside planning reforms, public investment and a proper industrial strategy for the people of the UK, but also for the people in my city, and at the same time ensuring that we work across departments to always have our nation's security at its core?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we're doing this through a number of levers. We have the growth mission, we have the clean power mission, working hand in hand to make sure that energy security and the decarbonisation of our power system contributes to growth in this country, and that means it contributes to job creation in this country, as well as in some cases overseas investment. We have the We've set up Great British Energy, we have the National Wealth Fund, we have the Clean Industry Bonus. All of those will help us achieve those objectives.
Bradley Thomas. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Have ministers or officials in the Ministry of Defence, the Home Office or the security services raised any concerns with her department over the possibility of offshore structures in British waters being used for Chinese intelligence gathering technology? And if there are sensitive matters which cannot be discussed in this House, will she commit to holding a private briefing for members of Parliament on the security implications of energy infrastructure from China?
Minister.
Okay. I don't think I can comment on the extent of conversations other than to reassure the honourable member that, of course, these conversations are taking place. Of course, there are robust processes that we're going through, and there'll be ongoing conversations. Again, because it's not my specific role, I wouldn't be able to say whether that is information that can be shared. I don't think it can be shared on a day-to-day basis, but perhaps if there's a briefing that we could arrange with members to give them some reassurance as the general approach, I'll investigate whether we can do that.
Melanie Arn.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I'm surprised at the benches opposite. They seem to have forgotten when they were pushing on this country the golden era of the relationship between the UK and China. And some of this is a legacy that remains from their time in government. And so I think that they should just be careful about how they're approaching this conversation. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to point out to the Minister the role that Grimsby plays in servicing and supporting operations of offshore wind, not only around UK waters, but also as far as Taiwan. Those skills and those competencies and capabilities do exist here in the country. So I'd like to ask the Minister what additional support will be given to expand those capabilities and support for those skills in this country.
Minister.
My honourable friend has been a real champion for Grimsby. I'm very glad to see her returned at the recent election so she can carry on championing all the potential that Grimsby has to offer, not least in terms of the wind sector. We think it's really important that we link up the skills and the capacity. That's one of the obstacles. We talk very often about how grid capacity and how planning issues can hold hold up the rollout of clean power. But actually, we know that we've got to have the skills base as well. And we're working with the Department of Education very much on that, how we can train the workforce and develop through things like the Growth and Skills Levy, capacity within the existing workforce as well to work on these exciting new projects.
Sir Alex Shelburne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister speaks about being reliant on petrochemical states and dictatorships who supplied the fuel needed for our energy system. And yet the vast majority of the processed materials that are needed, whether we construct them here or not, come from China. We recognise that some of these countries were dictators, but can the Minister at the dispatch box now confirm to this House that a country that uses slave labour, a country that has carried out the most horrendous crimes against the Uyghur population, a country that has sanctioned our own parliamentarians, is indeed as much as a dictatorship as the countries that she says we no longer want to be reliant on?
Well, if we followed the approach being suggested by the opposition front bench now, we would be very firmly back in the hands of the petrostates and the dictators. And we've seen, but in terms of relationship with China, as I've said, we will cooperate where we can, we will compete where we need to, and we will absolutely challenge if we must. And we've been clear that no company in the UK should have forced labour in the supply chain. This is why we've set up the Solar Task Force. This is why we're going through the robust processes ahead of the decision that we're talking about here today. And I will take no lessons from the honourable member, because we've had 14 years of being exposed to volatile energy markets, and we are trying to recreate our energy security through this investment.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Minister agree that after a real neglect of our energy infrastructure for the last 14 years, setting up GB Energy to help UK ownership of energy production in the future can only be a good thing, and our investment in critical minerals in Cornwall particularly, and the supply chain for floating offshore wind, will be crucial to secure our national security?
Minister.
On the one hand, the honourable members raised concerns about critical minerals being imported from abroad. And then when my honourable friend from Cornwall, who again is a real champion for her area, when she praises the investment that we have put into lithium extraction in Cornwall, they start jeering. And through GB Energy, through the National Wealth Fund, we will continue to do that investment.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To have true energy security, we need homegrown capability at all stages of the development of renewable energy infrastructure, from the earliest research to maintenance and decommissioning. So can the Minister tell me what steps she is taking to ensure that we have that homegrown full life cycle capability?
Minister.
I think from the honourable member's question, she may be talking about community energy. I'm not quite clear, but no. In that case, I'm saying, but it is really important, I think, that any investment is place-based, and we need to look at developing the capability right from skills and what the capacity of the local authorities are, which is where things like community energy comes in, but then also making sure that the finance goes where the investment is needed. And if I haven't understood the honourable member's question, I'd be happy to take it up with her afterwards.
Tom Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Minister's engagement on this topic. To have meaningful and serious discussions with other major economies is absolutely vital for our success. Does the Minister agree with me that these discussions are key not only to securing our economic aims, but also tackling the climate and nature crisis and also our wider international objectives?
Yeah, that international cooperation is absolutely crucial. And that does mean talking to countries with whom we share a great deal in common and have signed up the same objectives, but it also means talking to other countries to try to bring them with us too. And that is why we're hosting the IEA Summit in April in London. That is why we've set up the Global Clean Power Alliance. And that is why the Prime Minister went to the climate change talks in COP in Baku last autumn and showed international leadership, which is something that has been very much lacking from the UK government in previous years.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly, the national security concerns are being expressed across the House. Will the Minister give an undertaking that the construction, maintenance and indeed access to software will be carried out by British workers on British ships and not subcontracted to foreign powers.
Minister.
As I've said, I can't comment on individual cases, but there are processes to make sure that our national security is protected as we look ahead.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's reassurance about the government's rigorous scrutiny of energy projects involving Chinese technologies, and I understand the argument that at the current stage of our transition to net zero, we may need to look further afield to meet our domestic energy needs. But will the Minister agree with me that the long-term plan ought to be to reduce reliance on Chinese technology in the UK energy sector and rather to use British-made green technologies where there can be no concerns around national security or about ethical supply chains?
Minister.
Yeah, I agree absolutely, and that's why we are doing all we can to increase capacity through things like the Clean Industry Bonus, through investment from the National Wealth Fund, through the role of GB Energy and all the other measures that we'll be taking our industrial strategy to try to ensure that we keep the jobs in the UK and we create new jobs in the UK too.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ministers all over the place on this. In her opening remarks, she said that the United Kingdom has a world-leading renewable energy industry. Well, if we did, we wouldn't be having this discussion about foreign imported infrastructure. So will she commit to understand, notwithstanding the total failure of the Tories over 14 years to invest in the industrial base of renewable energy manufacturing across the United Kingdom, what is her strategy and her government strategy to get right in front of this, not just in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of resource supply, enterprise resource planning, intellectual property? What is the big shift that this government has got planned? Because I just hear jibber jabber.
That's not very polite of the honourable member, but as I've said, we are doing all we can to attract investment into the UK so that we can be as reliant as possible on our own resources, and that means our own supply chain, that means attracting investment and so on. But we are doing it through the National Wealth Fund, we're doing it through GB Energy, and there was much discussion, I don't know to what extent the honourable member took part in the debate around the GB energy, the Great British Energy Bill, but we are absolutely doing that. And on an international level, as I said, this has to be solved on an international level. We're doing a lot of work with our colleagues in terms of making the North Sea the green power plant of Europe through NSEC, the North Seas Energy Cooperation Council, and we've set up the Global Clean Power Alliance. And we cannot do this alone. We cannot do it acting alone. I know that the SNP prefers that approach, but we're absolutely doing it in cooperation, but we're doing it in the best interest of the British economy as well.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that her department's work is entirely consistent with the government's approach to China, cooperate where we can, compete where we need to, and challenge where we must?
Minister.
I mean, that is exactly our approach, and that is the right approach. I don't know whether the opposition front bench would advocate not cooperating with China where we can, but they're an incredibly important player on the world stage, and we gain nothing from completely turning our backs on them and not engaging in that dialogue.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we saw how Russia responded in the global tariffs and sanctions market by trying to use its dominance in the nuclear fuel market to put pressure on the allies of Ukraine. And therefore, we've seen that vulnerability in our energy supply chain when our enemies and allies of those enemies want to use it against us. The former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearland, has said that the government's target to decarbonise the grid hands power to Beijing. And when we talk about having reliance on dictator states, we have enough oil and gas in the UK to do that without any reliance. So why don't we just get drilling and get our own oil and our own gas out of the ground? So has the government, given I suspect in their mad dash to decarbonise the grid are not going to do that, has the government undertaken a risk assessment of the strategic vulnerability to our national security of our increasing reliance on Chinese rare earth minerals and battery production?
Minister.
I think I have already made very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are ongoing conversations about that, and we take national security incredibly seriously when we look at investment decisions. In terms of what he had to say about producing more oil and gas here for our own use, I think he needs a lesson in how the energy markets actually work. There's no guarantee that it would be used here.
Harriet Ross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The issue with this is the rush that the Labour government have to decarbonise by 2030. Because of that rush, we do not have the capabilities in this country at the moment to fulfil all the requirements that are needed to deliver those projects. Until the point where we are, we will always be reliant on overseas powers, overseas people like the Chinese government, like Chinese manufacturers, to deliver what we need in order to decarbonise. Is this government prepared and happy to sacrifice our national security and our energy security in order to reach that 2030 target?
Minister.
That sounds very much like the honourable member has made the case for an industrial strategy that ensures that we can match demand with supply, and that's an approach that was particularly missing from the last government.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost on a weekly basis, we are lectured by the net zero obsessed Secretary of State that the race for renewables is necessary in order to give us a secure future supply of energy in this country. And yet, the renewable industry is increasingly dependent upon Chinese technology and rare earth metals, which the Chinese control 70% of. So we're placing our future energy supply in the hands of a dictatorship which has proved itself in other states to be willing to use the infrastructure to blackmail the countries in which it's based. Is this not a case that we should be looking at the supply of fossil fuels that we have in this country, decades of gas and oil, which could be used? We would secure this, we'd be sure we could use it and we wouldn't be interfered by others in using it.
Minister.
We absolutely believe that the best route to energy security is by our Clean Power by 2030 mission and further investment in renewables, and that remains our stance.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers to the questions? The Minister will be aware that the costly environmental obligations which government imposes on home manufactured goods are not adhered to by many other nations, which prevents our UK manufacturers from being able to compete on many occasions. Combined with human rights breaches routinely carried out by the Chinese business on Uyghurs, on Falun Gong, on Christians and many other ethnic minorities. Does the Minister not agree that these considerations must be equally weighted with cost, and it will seem that human rights and Chinese production will never add up, and this must inform any contract offered by this nation of ours? Thank you.
Minister.
I think that the honourable member has frequently raised almost every issue you can think of in this chamber, but I know that I've taken part in very many debates about human rights in countries of concern overseas over the years. He's absolutely right to flag those concerns. As I said, we have the Solar Task Force, we have the supply chain mission with the Global Clean Power Alliance. We are very much alert to this. We do not want to see forced labour or any form of modern slavery in our supply chains, and that is something that we're absolutely determined to take action on.
That concludes the urgent question. We now come to the statement, and I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over and members to come in. Statement, Minister Dan Jarvis.
Thank you. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will make a statement on the publication of the Prevent Learning Review into the perpetrator of the attack that tragically killed Sir David Amess on the 15th of October 2021. Sir David Amess was a beloved member of this House, a hugely respected parliamentarian. His popularity extended right across the political divide. To win and keep the respect of those outside one's own party is, as we all know, a rare accomplishment. Over nearly 40 years of service in this place, Sir David fought every day for his constituents. He advanced numerous causes with compassion, persistence and skill, and members on all sides of the House knew him as a warm, respectful and always fair parliamentarian. His legacy lives on, not least in Southend, which now has the city status he campaigned so determinedly for. He will never be forgotten, And as the motto on Sir David's memorial shield behind me states, his light remains. Now, whilst this House has lost a hugely valued member on that terrible day, Sir David's wife and children lost a loving husband and a devoted father. They are in our thoughts and prayers today and always. Together with the Home Secretary, who spoke with Sir David's family recently, I recognise the courage and persistence they have shown in seeking the answers that they deserve. As the House will know, it was a heinous act of violence on the 15th of October 2021 that took Sir David away from those who knew and loved him. The killer, Ali Harbi Ali, and I won't say his name again, was convicted of murder in April 2022 and received a whole life sentence. The judge said that this was a murder that struck at the heart of our democracy, and he had no doubt whatsoever that the nature of this case meant that the perpetrator must be kept in prison for the rest of his life. The perpetrator had previously been referred to the PREVENT programme and subsequently to the Specialist Channel programme between 2014 and 2016, between 5 and 7 years before the attack took place. Immediately after the attack, a PREVENT learning review was jointly commissioned by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing to examine what happened in the case and see whether lessons needed to be rapidly learned. It was completed in February 2022. Now, last week, I made a statement to the House on the government's publication of the PREVENT learning review concerning the perpetrator of the abhorrent attack in Southport. Today, we're taking a further step to enable public scrutiny of PREVENT, and in recognition of the seriousness of the terrible attack on Sir David, by publishing the PREVENT learning review conducted in this case too. The perpetrator of the attack on Sir David became known to PREVENT in October 2014, when he was referred by his school after teachers identified a change in his behaviour. The case was adopted by the Channel Multi-Agency Early Intervention Programme in November of 2014. An intervention provider who specialised in tackling Islamist extremism was assigned to work with him. The perpetrator was exited from Channel in April 2015 after his terrorism risk was assessed as low. A 12-month post-exit police review in 2016 also found no terrorism concerns, and the case was closed to PREVENT at that point. There were no further PREVENT referrals in the 5 years between the case being closed and the attack. The PREVENT learning review examined how PREVENT dealt with the perpetrator's risk and how far the improvements made to PREVENT since he was referred 7 years prior would have impacted upon his management. The review considered both the handling of the case at the time and also the changes that had been made to PREVENT since the referral in 2014. It examined how far those changes addressed any problems identified and then made a series of recommendations. The reviewer found that from the material reviewed, the assessment in terms of the perpetrator's vulnerabilities was problematic, and this ultimately led to questionable decision-making and suboptimal handling of the case during the time he was engaged with PREVENT and Channel. It identified that the vulnerability assessment framework was not followed, with the perpetrator's symptoms being prioritised over addressing the underlying causes of his vulnerabilities. The reviewer ultimately found that while PREVENT policy and guidance at the time was mostly followed, the case was exited from PREVENT too quickly. The reviewer identified 6 issues, namely that the support given did not tackle all of the vulnerabilities identified, record keeping was problematic, and the rationale for certain decisions was not explicit. Responsibilities between police and the local authority were blurred. The tool used for identifying an individual's vulnerability to radicalisation was outdated. The school that made the referral to PREVENT should have been involved in discussions to help determine risk and appropriate support. And the tasking of the intervention provider was problematic, with a miscommunication leading to only one session being provided instead of two. The reviewer then examined how far changes in the PREVENT programme since 2016 had addressed these issues. The reviewer recognised the significant changes that had been made to PREVENT since the perpetrator was managed, in particular the introduction of the statutory prevent and channel duties under the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act of 2015. The reviewer concluded that over the intervening period, there have been considerable changes to policy and guidance for both the police and the wider prevent arena, including channel. Whilst a number of the issues in the perpetrator's case would most likely not be repeated today, there were still a number of areas which could be considered as requiring further work in order to mitigate against future failures. The reviewer made 4 recommendations for actions to further strengthen PREVENT. These were to improve the referral process, strengthen the initial intelligence assessment process, update the tool used to identify vulnerability to being drawn into terrorism, and to not reduce data retention periods. Since the report, the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing have fully implemented all 4 recommendations. First, a single national referral form was launched to encourage a consistent approach to referrals, building this into new training packages and mandating its use via statutory guidance. Second, training has been delivered to police staff to strengthen the initial intelligence check stage, ensuring their understanding of PREVENT is robust. Third, a new PREVENT assessment framework was rolled out in September of 2024. This replaces the tools previously used to assess all referrals and cases in the PREVENT system. And fourth, data retention periods were fully reviewed in 2023, and a joint decision was taken by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing to maintain retention review periods at 6 years or 6 years after the 12-month review for channel cases. In addition to the publication of the PREVENT Learning Review, we recognise the significant concerns that remain over the way in which PREVENT dealt with the perpetrator, as well as the need to ensure that the recommendations it suggested for improving the scheme have been properly implemented. Last week, I set out to the House a series of new reforms instituted by the government to strengthen the PREVENT programme, recognising the vital work done by officers across the country to keep people safe. That included the creation of a new independent PREVENT Commissioner. And I can today inform the House that the Home Secretary has asked the PREVENT Commissioner to review the PREVENT programme's interactions with the perpetrator in this case and ensure the implementation of all relevant recommendations. We will ensure that the Amis family have the support they need to engage with the PREVENT Commissioner in this work so that they can have confidence that it will get to the truth about any failings in the scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker, 2 further important issues have been raised which are relevant to this case: local policing and members' security. On local policing, concerns have been raised by the Amis family about the way in which Essex Police handled this case. A complaint has been made and referred back to the local force by the IOPC for consideration. That process must be allowed to follow its course. However, I can inform the House that the Home Secretary has written to the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner of Essex Police, asking them to set out how the investigation will be conducted and to be kept updated as the investigation progresses. Secondly, on members' security, this is something that the Home Secretary and I care deeply about, and I know that it is a matter to which Mr. Speaker attaches the utmost importance, as will all members right across this House. A review of security measures for MPs commissioned under the previous government has concluded, and all the recommendations have been implemented. We must ensure that the learnings from this case have been properly implemented. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Speaker for his continued leadership on these matters. The Speakers' Conference is specifically considering what reforms are necessary to further improve MPs' security and safety. This is another important step. And the Leader of the House, the Home Secretary and myself look forward to working closely with the Speaker and with all members to ensure that the facts of the appalling murder of Sir David are properly considered as part of the Speaker's conference work, and that the Parliamentary Security Department implements the recommendations it made following the review it conducted into the aftermath of Sir David's death. I'm also grateful to previous Home Secretaries and Security Ministers for their efforts in this area. Our democracy is precious, and this government will defend it against any and all threats, not least through the Defending Democracy Task Force, where we are mounting a whole-of-government response to combat these threats, including ensuring that elected representatives can perform their duties safely and without fear. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, I want to pay tribute once more to Sir David. He was a giant of this House, and we miss him dearly. In all that he did, Sir David epitomised public service at its best. It is beyond a tragedy that we can no longer seek his advice or rely on his wisdom. We can, though, follow his example and devote ourselves every day to the task of building a better and safer Britain. That is our shared challenge, Madam Deputy Speaker, and under this government, nothing will matter more. I commend this statement to the House.
I call Chris Philp, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me start by thanking